Hello students, today we would be going further from the previous sessions. Uh, we would be continuing on our session on neonatal definitions. In last session we had a little bit glimpse of birth asphyxia, what exactly is birth asphyxia, uh, and there is a little bit of correction. In previous lecture I discussed about the 3 points, but in fact it is all 4 points, and the presence of all 4 points are required for definition of birth asphyxia as given by American Congress of Obstetrics and Gynecology and endorsed by American Academy of Pediatrics. This definition is different from the WHO definition. It says, the ACOG definition says, the cord umbilical artery pH of less than 7 with a base deficit of more than 10 milliequivalents per liter. So you need to have a umbilical artery sample and blood gases for that. In addition to that, there should be persistence of Apgar scores of 0 to 3 for longer than 5 minutes. In addition to that, there should be neonatal neurological manifestations suggestive of hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, and there should be some or the evidence of multi-system organ dysfunction, like you might be having a liver dysfunction manifested by bleeding, you might be having respiratory dysfunction, respiratory distress you can have GI intolerance, you might have renal failure. So there should be more than one organ system involved in addition to the neurological system. You can have also, the newborn can manifest with symptoms of cardiac dysfunction, they can manifest as shock. So birth asphyxia, for having a diagnosis of birth asphyxia as per the ACOG, you need to have all these 4 criteria fulfilled. And this is different from the working definition of World Health Organization, which says if there is no cry at 1 minute of age, then you can have birth asphyxia. But this is what the ACOG says. Next is, we would be having the detailed discussion of regarding birth asphyxia, and when we come to the diagnosis of birth asphyxia, when we would discuss about birth asphyxia in detail in our next lectures. And we would be also discussing about Apgar scores, what they are, and what is hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. So just for the sake of introduction of birth asphyxia, this is just a definition of birth asphyxia which has to be fulfilled. Now, there is a term known as respiratory distress. We are just dealing with the terminologies or what are the definitions which you would be encountering, or when we would discuss the disease in detail, then we would be using these terminologies more often. So the respiratory distress, there should be presence of at least 2 of the following criteria. One is, the respiratory rate should be more than 60 per minute in a quiet and resting baby. There should be subcostal or intercostal recessions or expiratory grunt. So of these 3, you need to have at least 2 criteria fulfilled to label the neonate for having respiratory distress. Another diagnosis is hyaline membrane disease. Now, hyaline membrane disease is also called as respiratory distress syndrome. So respiratory distress in a neonate is different from respiratory distress. The hyaline membrane disease is defined as, for the definition, the newborn should meet all the three clinical criteria. First, it should essentially be a preterm neonate, because hyaline membrane disease is not diagnosed in a term or post-term newborn. The respiratory distress should have onset within 6 hours of birth. So the term respiratory distress which we are dealing here, it comes from the previous definition. And if they are fulfilling those criteria of respiratory distress and which having onset within 6 hours of birth, and either of any of these three, so either they have an amniotic fluid LS ratio of less than 1.5, which rarely somebody does. You need to have a negative gastric aspirate shake test, which is one of the tests which is not so frequently done, and the chest X-ray showing either poor expansion with air bronchogram or reticulogranular pattern or ground glass opacity. Now this is the one of the thing which is frequently done for the evidence of hyaline membrane disease, which in our practice we rely on chest X-rays to have a diagnosis of hyaline membrane disease or HMD or respiratory distress syndrome of the preterm, which we call as. This is a typical X-ray of hyaline membrane disease, where you are able to see ground glass appearance of the X-ray chest, and also little bit of air bronchogram is also quite evident. This is where atelectasis has happened. Now this is one more X-ray of hyaline membrane disease, where you can see clearly air bronchogram. So if you are look keenly enough, then you would be able to appreciate a dark line, a blackish line in a white background. That would be the air bronchogram, air in the bronchus. So it against a backdrop of non-aerated alveoli. Next is meconium aspiration syndrome. The meconium aspiration syndrome, for the diagnosis of meconium aspiration syndrome, you must have two of the following. One is meconium staining of liquor or staining of nails, umbilical cord or skin. So if you are present at the delivery and you know there is meconium staining of liquor, or if you have not attended the delivery but later on you are seeing the neonate and you are seeing there is staining of nails, umbilical cord or skin, so that simply means that there was some meconium stained amniotic fluid, and in addition to that the newborn should have respiratory distress having onset soon after birth, and in addition to that they might have radiological evidence of aspiration pneumonitis with areas of atelectasis and hyperinflation. Now it is very interesting to note that these radiological evidence of aspiration pneumonitis with the area of atelectasis, they do not appear immediately after birth. It usually takes 6 to 8 hours for it to develop, but the respiratory distress, it develops soon after the birth. So you might be having a newborn with history of meconium stained amniotic fluid and having respiratory distress soon after the birth, for which you get an X-ray done about 6 to 8 hours later, and when you find X-ray like this, then you give a probable diagnosis of meconium aspiration syndrome. So there are patchy areas of atelectasis. Very little air is seen in these areas. So this is meconium aspiration. Then it is known as apneic attacks. So again, once more, so it is respiratory arrest with duration greater than 20 seconds, and if the duration is less than 20 seconds, then it needs to be accompanied by bradycardia, which might be accompanied by cyanosis. Next is septicemia. Now sepsis or septicemia is one of the most frequent diagnosis which is made in neonatology. So you should be very cautious regarding this diagnosis. In septicemia, there are basically two terms which we use. One is confirmed sepsis, another is probable sepsis. So based on probable sepsis, we initiate the treatment and we seek the confirmation of diagnosis by your confirmed sepsis. So probable sepsis. Probable sepsis is if the clinical picture is suggestive of sepsis or pneumonia. So you need to have a background clinical picture which should be suggestive of sepsis or pneumonia. In addition to that, it must have any one of the following predisposing factor. So you need to have a clinical picture, you need to have some predisposing factors. What are these predisposing factors? One is prolonged rupture of membrane, foul smelling liquor, amnionitis, or gastric polymorphs more than 5 per high power field. So this gastric polymorphs, what are these? Whenever a newborn is delivered, what we do to have clear insight into the predisposing factor to establish the diagnosis of there is some amniotic fluid is contaminated. We have a gastric aspirate of the newborn, and there we try to see if there are polymorphs more than 5 per high power field, then we label that it is one of the predisposing factors. Secondly is you have to have a positive septic screen. So you need to have a clinical picture suggestive. On top of that, you need to have some predisposing factor, and you need to have some positive septic screen. So for positive septic screen, there should be presence of at least 2 of these criterias, and you also need to have some radiological evidence of pneumonia. What is the positive septic screen? The total leukocyte count should be less than 5,000 per cubic millimeter. In rest of the you must have heard, you must have learned that whenever there is infection, then there is leukocytosis. In neonatology, whenever there is, on the contrary, when there is depression in the WBC count or WBC count when they are decreased, they are more suggestive of sepsis, and with this they have a poorer outcome. The bands to total neutrophil ratio should be more than 0.2. What are bands and what we would be discussing more in when we discuss the when we come across our major discussion on neonatal sepsis. And C reactive protein more than 10 nanogram per ml, or micro ESR more than 10 millimeter in 1 hour. So we would be going in details about what exactly micro ESR is, how to get it micro ESR done. So for the sake of definition now, you need to have 2 out of these 4 to have a positive septic screen, and there should be radiological evidence of pneumonia. To have a diagnosis of proven or definitive sepsis, you need to have presence of anyone if clinical picture is suggestive. So the base is you need to have a clinical index of suspicion, you need to have clinical picture which is suggestive. So investigation is secondary, the primary thing is you need to have a newborn with some or the other clinical picture which is suggestive of sepsis. And in addition to that, if you are able to isolate the pathogen from blood or urine or CSF or trachea, then it becomes a definitive diagnosis. So if you have a blood culture positive or urine culture positive or CSF culture positive or tracheal aspirate positive for some organism, then you say it is a definitive or proven sepsis, or there is pathological or microbiological evidence of sepsis on autopsy. So if you are finding some organ system which are as damaged as in a sepsis are damaged, then we say it was definitely a case of sepsis. Next we move to the intraventricular periventricular hemorrhage or IVH PVH. Here also you have a probable diagnosis of IVH PVH and you have confirmatory diagnosis of IVH or PVH. So what is a probable diagnosis of intraventricular hemorrhage or periventricular hemorrhage? So periventricular means around the ventricles and intraventricular means inside the ventricle if there is hemorrhage. It is based on at least 3 clinical criteria in a preterm neonate in whom hypoglycemia and pyogenic meningitis have been excluded. First, there should be onset of symptoms within 72 hours of age. The symptoms are like apneic attacks or subtle seizures. There is sudden unexplained pallor or jaundice. There is gross hypotonia with increased popliteal angle and full or bulging anterior fontanelle if there is. So out of these 5, we must be having at least 3 findings in a preterm neonates in whom you have ruled out there is no hypoglycemia or there is no pyogenic meningitis. Then we say this is a probably we are dealing with a intraventricular hemorrhage or periventricular hemorrhage. Definitive diagnosis of IVH PVH is made by your cranial ultrasonogram or CT findings or your confirmation on autopsy. Another important thing is acute renal failure. So this acute renal failure in newborn is little bit of different from what you have learnt in adult medicine. So we have little bit of the criteria are little bit different in pediatrics and neonatology. The base is almost same. So there is probable diagnosis of acute renal failure in which you can have any one of the following. One is urine flow of less than 0.5 ml per kg per hour and the blood urea nitrogen should be greater than 20 mg/% and serum creatinine of more than 1.2 mg/%. Now this serum creatinine should not be taken within first 24 to 48 hours, definitely more than 48 hours. So after day 2 if you have a serum creatinine of more than 1.2 mg/%, then it is significant. In addition to that, we must know that acute renal failure can also occur with high urine output and high blood urea nitrogen can also occur without acute renal failure. So these are the one of the few exceptions which you must do. It is based on the clinical scenario which we might be talking. So these are your renal failure index and fractional excretion of sodium. How we calculate the renal failure index and how we calculate the fractional excretion of sodium. So for to have a definitive diagnosis of acute renal failure in neonate, you need to have any one of these three. So this is about our major part of the diagnosis, major part of the definitions which you use. There are many more definitions, but for our syllabus, for our purpose, uh, these would suffice, I think. If you have any queries, then you can contact me. Thank you. Defined as urinary sodium into plasma creatinine, which is divided by plasma sodium and urinary creatinine, the percent of which is expressed as a fractional excretion of sodium. Renal failure index is again urinary sodium into plasma creatinine divided by urinary creatinine expressed in percentage.